my very best to get this job that I so crave.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Fanzone Debate. We got an interesting one here for you today. We got two players who are not new to the league, but haven't had a ton of matches, played semi-recently, and now they're going to go up against each other. We got Adelaide Spence going up against Joe Farrelly. Both, I think, having a bit of an, as we were just discussing before the match started, maybe a little bit unlucky. Joe debuted against Kirk, who was the champion, and he actually kind of got thrown in at the last minute. It was at that point, and then he went on to play Holtzman, who just also was on a title run at the same time, who I believe also beat Spence in that same title run that Holtzman was going on at the time. So both these players, a little bit of an unlucky run, but I think really talented when it comes to debate. We'll see what happens. We got Brian here with me today. Brian, how you doing, sir?
I am doing just wonderful. Glad to be back here. Joe, I know we saw just recently. He did a great job debating. Adelaide is someone who I definitely don't always agree with their opinions, but they do an excellent job of debating them.
That's what
and that's what counts here. So
that's what we're here to find out. Kirk, you are also here. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Excited for this match. Been thinking about this today. Joe and Spence, both players who have not had the success that they've wanted or that they're capable of, I think, so far. But I think they've both been dancing around like that really solid game that they need to put together to win. So just a matter. I'm excited to see which one of them puts it all together today better and pulls out the win. So it should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go over and talk to Mr. Farrelly first. Joe, welcome. Like we said, you were kind of thrown into the tournament in 2021 tournament. You were kind of thrown in there at the last minute, and you were like, yeah, sure, I'll play whoever. And little did you know you had to play Kirk, who went on the monster run that he went on. Then you got to play Holtzman, but then you got to play Mike Hanley in a very fun match as well.
That was so much fun.
And now you're here to play Spence. So maybe a bit of an unlucky first bit. But now I think you and Spence are pretty evenly matched. It's going to be interesting. How are you feeling going into it?
Yeah, I feel good. It has been a bumpy start to the Fanzone debate. I think this is sort of like the middle tier of sort of multiplex entertainment for me. Because obviously Fandom I've been very, very successful in. And people know in Warzone I don't really prepare that hard, and this is sort of the middle ground. I could prepare harder. I think there's more work I could probably do, but I definitely still put more effort into the Fandom trivia. But I'm looking forward to this as some good quiz stuff, that even stuff that's not from strengths that sort of I think I'm strong in. So I'm looking forward to. But I know Spence, I know they'll be very strong in it too. And yeah, this should be close. I think this will be close.
All right, great. Well, let's bring in Spence. Spence, welcome to the program. You taking on Joe now today. Are you excited? Are you nervous? How you feeling?
I've realized in time between when this started in the promo, this is my only league that I am above or like not negative in. So I'm gonna try to keep that going. And now I am playing the video store rebates champion who knows about fucking calculus. So I'm in trouble.
No. You saw that. We were definitely both Googling everything that went on there. We had no idea. But it sounded convincing.
That's all that matters at the end of the day. So we're going to get into the match. Here's how this is going to work. So Spence and Joe are going to debate some questions for us tonight. They drafted some categories. I gave them some questions. They're going to debate those questions before our very souls at the end of the question. They're going to get 1 minute openings, 1 minute closings, and a 5 minute free form in between. And at the end of those questions, Kirk, Brian, and I will write on our handy dandy boards who we thought won the point. Best 2 out of 3 points wins the question, and the first to win 3 questions wins the match. So if we're all tied up after the 4 prep questions, we will move on to a bonus question. Any questions from the players? All right, then let's get into this. right, we are going to get right into this with the first question, which was drafted by Adelaide in the category of Oscars. The question is, what is the worst pre-1950s Best Picture winner? Elating. I'm so excited. So we're going to start with Spence. Spence, you got 1 minute to open this argument when you start talking.
I want you to imagine Hollywood in 1931. Sounds like shit, don't it? And you're probably imagining, oh my God, what does it look like? Does it look like really bad writing, horrendous racism, a love for the Old West, which is a little misplaced because everyone like grew up then? Like, oh, it's so nice, but they forgot how everyone was dying and it was really boring. Nothing was going on. That's Cimarron. Cimarron is a story of a family who moves to Oklahoma to get land. And while they're in there, nothing happens. They own a family, and that's a majority of the conflict that goes on. They have a fight with some people who are fighting for the land that's never properly set up or never really understood their reasoning other than land good. And beyond that, the storytelling isn't even structured very well. Characters are introduced out of nowhere with no real reasoning, no real backstory other than, introduced in the middle of this character's journey when we should have seen them at the start, seeing how it's put together. This movie is horribly just made, both in editing, in acting, in production, in writing. Every part of this film is poorly constructed. No part of it is done good overall, and it's the worst Best Picture winner ever, period, beyond this question.
Time. Okay, let's move over to Joe. Joe, you now have 1 minute to open your argument when you start talking.
There are a lot of factors that come into play when discussing the worst Best Picture winner. It's not just a case of what is the worst movie to win Best Picture. That's not what the question is. Because it's also what is the worst winner of the Best Picture award. And for that, we need to look at, of course, the movie itself, but also the era in which it was released and the competition. I think for the time, as well as on reflection, the only answer that truly fits this question and really sets the bar as the worst is 1941's How Green Was My Valley. A family drama set in a Welsh mining village, Welsh being in inverted commas. The movie offers nothing to the conversation that hasn't already been said, offers nothing new, and that's what you want from a Best Picture winner, something that says something new or offers something different or offers something interesting or revolutionary in terms of filmmaking. How Green Was My Valley is none of these. And I think when you look at the movie itself, as well as the competition and the era and everything that encompasses it, you will understand why it is the worst.
Time. Okay. I haven't seen either of these, so yay. 5 minute freeform when one of you starts talking. I will throw this up on the screen when there's 1 minute remaining for you. Don't talk over each other or I will come and scream at you and make you sad. 5 minutes when one of you starts talking.
You can go first.
I think for years you've had that sort of, you see a movie and you go, this is Oscar bait, and that's How Green Is My Valley is like the worst example of this. It's set in a Welsh mining village and it's the most Hollywood Wales I've ever seen. I've been to Wales several times and it's just not like that, and it definitely wasn't back then. It's an American ideal, and trying to set it in this sort of at this time of this hardship and all that, but it doesn't present. That's not what's presented, and that's not what you get from it. It's an American idealized version. That's the worst kind of Oscar bait you can get. But not only that, I think Cimarron also has scope. It stretches, I think, from 1886 through to 1927, covering sort of one man and his experiences. And it's a bit of a commentary on moving with the times, which doesn't just show in the film, but I think also with the filmmaking.
I think that your criticism of saying, oh, it's criticizing what's going on at the current time, it doesn't really apply to it. Cimarron is a movie that is purely living in the past. It is telling a story that honestly doesn't even exist, and not even an adapted screenplay. It is an original story about a family that does not exist and has no impact on the future. And even beyond that, I think that you're underselling what How Green Was My Valley was about. Just because a movie is not accurate doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. A lot of the films are inaccurate and still great. This movie is just an ode to small town life and family, and I think each character and each performance in that really add to that. There's a sense of camaraderie in the family, even the interaction in the small town really worked really well. This is like a precedent on the waterfront of the idea of so much is going on. They're literally fighting against these union busters, people trying to break them down and trying to stop them from fighting for equal workplace rights, which something we're still dealing with right away. Sorry. I think Cimarron is a movie that's so horrendously outdated. It's a film that's almost implicitly about racism. Characters whose only real characteristic is how racist they are and if they're racist or not. By the end of the film, the status quo does not change. They end up just sort of living in that languid non-existence of, are people not white bad? And that's most of the film.
But I think with Cimarron, I think, while not being anywhere near sort of today's level, I think it still speaks to the social aspect of its plot. The author was known to be against the stealing of land from Native Americans. And even with a Hollywood adaptation, I think it still holds some of that tone, especially when you look at sort of the idealized version of 1930s. I think it still holds on to that tone, something that probably even today with the sensitivity that there is would still be criticized for being too woke, even though the stereotypes, I agree with you on the stereotypes of some of the characters, but the underlying plot itself is still something that I think touches on that tone that the original author of the book intended. Plus, I think you look back, I think people still know Cimarron. I think that's why it was remade in 1960. I think that's why you have this How Green Was My Valley is something that was just so forgettable and so like the Oscar bait. Yours was nominated for acting, directing, cinematography, and I think it won writing and art direction, whereas no one remembers How Green Was My Valley. They only know it because it beat Citizen Kane. But it's not just Citizen Kane. You look at it was nominated against The Maltese Falcon and Suspicion as well. These are movies that 80 years later are still held up and considered as great. And I think it's not the worst. It's not just the worst movie. It's the worst Best Picture winner. This did not deserve to win Best Picture. Even you look at what it presented and its competition.
I think comparing it, saying, oh, movie bad because it beat a better movie is just like a really non-starter argument. It doesn't really add anything, doesn't really go anywhere. Like How Green Was My Valley, just because you don't like this mean it doesn't have good elements. I think that the way that it speaks to family, it speaks to maturity. I think the way that it deals with life is so unheard of, even in modern film. I think it says so much about the idea of adulthood and the complications that come through life. Cimarron is really just like a one-note story. And going back to your original point about how the author was against this land stealing argument, that's not presented in the film. This film it's like if you adapted a book and only adapted every 5 chapters. Yes, it spans like 60, 70 years. By the end of the day, it doesn't say that. At the end of the film, it starts with one of the kids marrying a Native American woman. It's like, okay, progression. And the mom's like, oh, fuck you, I hate this. You're marrying a woman who is not white, and she's against it. Literally, the next cut, she's receiving an award for a humanitarian award for not being racist.
It's more character development than you give it in How Green Is My Valley. It's a lot more character. There's no character development. You might not see the character development. At least they change.
But it's not motivated though. It's one point where there is no transition, there is no natural change. It is just, person has changed off screen, and that's bad filmmaking. How Green Is My Valley is incredible filmmaking. That script is tight and it is beautiful because you see every single member of this family over even like a relatively smaller period is still there learning life around them, and they're having conflicts and they are trying to change, and they do through conflict, and that is the inherent best part of a story.
It has scope. I think the best term for it would be it's sweeping. I think the opening land rush sequence is fantastically filmed, fantastically made.
Okay, Joe, we're gonna start with you first. You got 1 minute when you start talking.
Cimarron is a movie that has something to say. I think it holds up as a sort of more of a sweeping epic. I think How Green Was My Valley is a movie that fails across the board in almost all categories that make a great movie and a great Best Picture winner. The cinematography is good, but in no way resembles the land it's supposed to represent. It offers nothing in the way of character development or acting performance. And when compared to not only the other Best Picture winners, but it's also its fellow nominees, is one that should never have won the award and deserves to be buried. Cimarron not only holds up, but also has a story that was relevant then, relevant when it was made, and is relevant today. Yes, you have those stereotypes in there. That's the product of the times, but the story itself, the underlying themes, I think they still hold up. I think although some bits are maybe glossed over because it is an adaptation of a book, you still have that character development in there, whereas in How Green Was My Valley, you get no character development. All you get is a story that is Oscar bait and set up and adapted in a poor way, in a way that doesn't represent what it's supposed to represent.
Time. Okay. We're going to move over to Spence, who has 1 minute to close their argument when they start talking.
How Green Was My Valley represents a lot of films that we have nowadays. The ode to a memory, even that happened last year with Belfast. This idea of a director or a writer recreating memories from their childhood and portraying it on screen in a really matured way that they couldn't exactly handle as a child. That is this film. Not only has it aged beautifully, every person in it is incredible. The writing is incredible. You're talking about how Cimarron has this grand scope. It doesn't really have that. It has the opening scene, which is big, and after that it's a single town. And a single town has nothing going on other than bad people, bad characters, bad writing. Nothing is adding to the world. How Green Was My Valley is this beautiful memoir to a past that the crew and everyone is trying to recreate and live in that memory, and it's beautiful. Cimarron says nothing, and it stands for nothing other than just a horrendously awful value. And even when you detract its morals from its overall storytelling itself is still not good. The screenplay is poorly structured. The acting is not well done. The directing is bad. Every part of Cimarron is poorly put together. You may think that How Great Valley is inaccurate to Wales, but at the end of the day, it still is a full, cohesive film with a passionate and hardworking crew and cast.
Okay. All right. Let's bring in the judges. All right. Oh, what do they do with my marker? There it is. Okay. Okay. Interesting. I had to go purely based off of everything that was said because I have not seen these films. There were a lot of moments where the players said, like, well, the writing is bad. Why? Give me some examples. Didn't hear anything. There's sweeping shots of what? I don't know. There was just a lot of like talk, but not a lot to back it up. I thought Joe's jab at I do think what the competition is matters in the context of these questions when you're looking at what is the best or worst of a category. I think you do have to look at the competition and say this movie beat Citizen Kane and this and that does hold some ground to me. So I think Spence just writing that off was a little rough. But at the end of the day, I still went with Adelaide Spence. I thought that their closing was very strong. That was really where they got fired up. Joe's closing was just kind of like a recap of everything that he had said, but there wasn't anything in there that really made me sway to his side. I thought that Spence's closing did a really good job of not only recapping everything, but also saying that there's just everything about Cimarron is just absolutely awful. And here's all of the things in that Spence then used things from Joe's argument of just because you don't think it's accurate to Wales, was it Wales or whatever? It's still a full cohesive story that makes sense and has emotional stuff in it, whether or not it was better than the other movies or not. So I don't know. This was a weird one for me, but it was kind of hard to dig through it personally. But I went with Spence. Brian.
Yeah, I had never seen either of these movies either. And I'll be honest, there were times during this debate where I wasn't even sure which movie we were talking about because they're just both telling me kind of why they all suck. So I really have no interest in seeing either one. I think questions like this are subjective. And so in terms of interpretation, and I actually disagree with Tim. I kind of feel like if the question was which film least deserved to win the Oscar, that's different than which is the worst film. The worst Best Picture winner to me means what's the worst film that happened to win Best Picture, but that's just interpretation. As a result, I think that a lot of the time Joe spent talking about the competition that didn't really do much to sway me. Spence was able to spend more of their time talking about it. So while it was actually a very close fight, I gave the edge to Spence.
Okay. And Kirk, where are you going and why?
I actually went with Joe. For me, I agree with you, Tim. It was very much well, my movie at least has this and your movie doesn't have that. And it was back and forth. So Joe's argument about it being the worst Best Picture winner did sway me. I think the idea of the legacy and all that was important. And with everything else kind of a wash, that was the thing that kind of just won me over. So I disagree with Brian that I do think that was important. So that's why I went that way.
Okay. All right. Well, Spence wins the first point. They are up 1-0, but we are going to move on to the next question, which was drafted by Joe. It is from the category of Star Trek. And the question is, who should direct a new Star Trek movie? Specifically, someone who's never directed a Trek movie before. That was the caveat we gave. Joe, you get to open this one. You got 1 minute when you start talking.
It's been 6 years since Star Trek last hit the big screen. A fourth movie in the Kelvin timeline is on the cards, but it's a way off. But the question of who should direct the next Star Trek movie is one that forces us to look at the franchise as a whole. What makes it is what it is? What separates it from other sci-fi movies? What has made it endure for 60 years? And who working today has a filmography that fits with those values, but also can give us something new? And I think any director can make a foray into sci-fi, but which director out there has the skill set to gel with Roddenberry's world? And for me, that director is Jordan Peele. Peele is a director that 3 movies into his career has shown that he understands sci-fi. With Get Out, he showed how sci-fi can be used to look at social, racial issues. I think in Us, he showed that, as well as how different experiences make us the people we are. And with Nope, he showed us how our understanding of the unknown leads us to sort of to risk everything based on our assumptions. I think Into Darkness was a poor remake of Wrath of Khan, and I think where Beyond succeeded was that it brought it back to its roots, and I think Peele has the ability to do that and convey his messages.
Okay. Move over to Spence, who now has 1 minute to open their argument when they start talking.
To me, the elements of the best Star Trek films are films that are rooted in a amazing ensemble cast, incredible villains, a really strong script, and a director doesn't get lost in the weeds of it, and overall just someone who knows how to coordinate tone, which I think is hard for a lot of filmmakers to do. That's why I picked Drew Goddard. I think that in his 2 films he's made so far, both of those have navigated that really well. I think Cabin in the Woods is just a way of upending the horror genre in a way that a lot of modern films haven't been able to top really before or since. And I think that Bad Times at the El Royale shows that with an incredible ensemble cast, anything is possible. That's a film that is so dense you can get lost in it very easily. I think Drew Goddard navigates that really well. And beyond that, I think that he's shown that he can work really well with genre filmmaking in terms of what he's done in TV with Daredevil and Lost. He has found a way to compel or make incredible, compelling stories. And I think that he is able to add to the Star Trek universe, whereas I think other directors or other writers would end up getting lost in the past. The future would be made by Drew Goddard, and I think he would be incredible at it.
Time. Okay. Hey, I know who these people are. You guys got 5 minutes when one of you start talking.
So I think the issue with Goddard is, I think, while yes, I agree with the ensemble stuff, I don't think there's anything in either Cabin in the Woods or Bad Times at the El Royale that really speaks to why he could helm a Star Trek movie. There's some stuff about why he could do a good movie that upends sci-fi. There's definitely elements of that, but I don't think there's anything about Star Trek in there. I think you just look at those 3 films, I think each of them show a different element of sort of Star Trek. You've got the racial and social commentary. Star Trek since the beginning has had stuff with the mirror universe, which I think speaks to us very well, and the sort of the sci-fi element of Nope with this sort of this creature that we don't understand and ends up being something that we never thought it was, because based on our assumptions, it's Encounter at Farpoint. There's so many episodes of The Next Generation that really speak to that, and that's what Nope says to me. And I think he's now ready to move into something like Star Trek.
Well, if you're using that against Drew Goddard, look what Jordan Peele started. He started as a sketch comedy writer and comedian. That's not this person you expect to make Get Out and Nope and these big sci-fi horror films that's so against type. I think Drew Goddard has that in him. And again, you're I don't know if we can count TV, but if we can, you're distracting his TV work, which I think is incredible handlings of genre and sci-fi and everything beyond that. But even on top of that, I think that saying like, oh, people can add to things. I think Jordan Peele is a fan first and foremost, which sounds good. I think he's going to get lost in it. I think that he's actually. I looked at this. The big alien villain in Nope is actually inspired by the main alien villain in the opening scene or the first episode of Star Trek Next Generation. Peele would likely return to TNG. I think it's overall a problem because Peele, I think, is a director who, as we've seen,
that's where I disagree. You see, he's already. This doesn't have to be Kelvin time. It doesn't have to be extra. It can be something new, but also we know about his love of working with Daniel Kaluuya. I think with Daniel Kaluuya, we could have our next Benjamin Sisko, but that's a debate for another time. But I think. I love Cabin in the Woods, and I thought Bad Time was a seriously underrated movie, but nothing about those movies tells me about Star Trek. I think Peele has shown a love for sci-fi and social commentary, not just in his directing, but his producing credits like Candyman and The Twilight Zone being perfect examples. He has this love for sort of sweeping sci-fi, but also his movies show that he can, because it's not just about Star Trek, it's about bringing Star Trek, I think, back to its roots. That's where Beyond succeeded against Star Trek Into Darkness. Whereas I think bringing it back to his roots with this sort of the social commentary and the messaging, that's what Star Trek was about. Nope, at its core is about the mistreatment of animals. That's the voyage home.
I think you're underselling what what Goddard was able to do with Cabin in the Woods, of the idea of deconstruction. I think Star Trek is a franchise ripe for deconstruction. I think one of the best films, even if we were talking about like, oh, what Bad Times at El Royale do? I think that Undiscovered Country would work great under Goddard. This tight political thriller, I think that he would be incredible for. I think Peele is someone who, he sounds great, but I think the biggest danger of getting a director like him who has made such consistently great films and is so lauded by audiences and studios is that the studios will not be able to tell him no. And the biggest danger of never telling someone no is dense. Fans are going to create a dense product. And even then, if you look at the reason that Star Wars is as beloved as it is not because George Lucas, when George Lucas worked on his own, he destroyed it with the prequels. You needed an editor and a student to tell him, hey, your blue milk shit is not going to work, and edited it down. I think that Jordan Peele with Star Trek would create the Star Wars prequels, where it is so obsessed with itself and the density. And again, Peele is someone who has said on the record that he loves TNG. And if he made a Star Trek film, it would probably be a readaptation of TNG, like how Kelvin's readaptation of the original series. And he would get lost in it. TNG is dense. Look at the films. When the filmmakers of TNG got lost in the weeds and got the denseness of it and made bad films like Nemesis and Insurrection. We don't want that. We want the new future. I think Goddard would be able to avow himself to that.
But I think what you're saying is I think even Jordan Peele has shown in these movies that he's made is that he has this ability to sort of breed sort of subtlety and restraint as well. You know, these are great sci-fi movies, but they're patient. They're very patient movies in their build. He can work with an ensemble. I think Get Out shows he can work with an ensemble and create memorable and epic villains. And I think everything that he's shown in his not only shows that he can make epic sci-fi, that's what's been shown, but it's also there's elements in every single movie he's made and everything he has produced that speaks to Star Trek as a whole. I think Drew Goddard has made two great movies, but there's nothing in them that for me speaks to Star Trek. I think Cabin in the Woods is a great deconstruction of that, but nothing in that says that he could do that with Star Trek. I don't think Star Trek needs deconstructing. I think it needs to be brought back to its roots, and I think those roots are embedded in what Jordan Peele has already made. And I think, yes, there's a good ensemble cast, but it's not a sci-fi movie with an ensemble cast.
I think the biggest issue that you're sort of circling around is size of film, and I don't think Peele's able to do that. I think that you're underselling what Goddard's able to do with the dense narrative universe of Cabin in the Woods. I think that Peele's denseness would be a problem in the overall final product.
Time. All right, Spence, you're going to close first. You got 1 minute when you start talking.
I was going to add to this earlier. I think the denseness of us towards the ending was overall what's going to detract from Peele's overall final product. Where I think that Goddard is someone who's able to understand denseness. I think that both of his films have been really rich and well thought out, while also having incredible universes within them. I think Hemsworth was a great villain. Added that to Bad Times at El Royale, and I think Cabin in the Woods is a film that overall I think that the universe that it creates is so inherently interesting. I'm not going to deny that Peele made 3 great films, but I think overall that both his name, what I think would scare studios and cause him to make an unfettered and uninterrupted final product, which would be overall bad. And he is married to his love for the next generation, which I think would overall detract from what the possibilities of the future of Star Trek is. Right now, we see on TV, Brave New Worlds is expanding the universe of Star Trek to be possibly the best it's ever been. I don't think Peele is going to be able to do that. I think that he is someone who, as we've seen in Nope and in Us, his love for the past. And I think his love for the past is going to be ultimately what draws him back. He is going to take Star Trek in the direction of George Lucas in the prequel trilogy, which I think is overall a problem. Goddard is someone who I think has so many incredible new ideas to offer to the universe.
Time.
Don't attack the flag.
All right, Joe, you get to close. 1 minute when you start talking.
I think Goddard, as a producer, has made some great sci-fi, and been involved in the making of some great sci-fi, like The Martian, Lost, 10 Cloverfield Lane. But you also have the Cloverfield paradox in there. So, but as a director, I think he works better with either an interesting take on something that has been sort of done to death, but that didn't have much to say, or smaller, more grounded ensemble piece. Trek is the opposite of this. It's social commentary mixed with ensemble and epic visuals. And after just 3 movies, Peele has distanced himself from being just another sci-fi director and has cemented himself as someone with great ideas and the technical ability to tell them in a compelling way to an audience. You can find pieces in all of his films that you can connect back to Star Trek. Peele is not just a great fit for Star Trek. Star Trek is a great fit for Peele. I think you look at the transition from Us to Nope, it shows that he can learn from criticism and accept that feedback. I think bringing him into Star Trek, he's still going to be someone who's being brought in from the outside. And if a person, like you say, has the love for that franchise, I think it's someone who's willing to listen, willing to accept feedback and criticism, and his love for the franchise will show, and his directorial history shows.
Strike it from the record. Okay, we'll bring in the judges. Oh man, what a time to be alive.
I'm not sure Kirk is qualified to judge this. He has no interest in Star Trek.
Actually, that makes him better to judge it, I think.
All right, Kirk, you get to go first.
Okay. This is a good fight, and it's a hard one though because they both came at it from kind of different angles. So it's kind of what vision you were more interested in. Ultimately, I did go with Joe though. Sorry, Spence. But I think the thing I really like Joe was doing is Joe was able to say, take things from Jordan Peele movies and make them applicable. It's like, well, this is what Us is about. It's this, and in Star Trek, and this is this was in Nope, and this that in Star Trek. So I think that was really something that really grabbed me, just his understanding of that world. And I agree with Joe. I think it's about the best movies are the ones that more go back to the roots. So I think that's the way. And also I liked how he kind of shot back. With Spence's big argument was that he's not going to hear no, and it'll be too bloated. And Joe talked about how he took the criticism from Us to Nope. So and also I want to see the DS9 movie with Daniel Kaluuya now. So yeah, I'm gonna go with Joe on that one.
I also went with Joe. I thought that Spence did a good job, but I want to be clear. I actually hate the idea of Jordan Peele doing a Star Trek movie. I don't I did not like that choice at all when Joe submitted it, but he convinced me for the sake of the argument. I thought he did a really good job of talking about how Jordan Peele would be able to take the criticism and everything like you were talking about, Kirk. And then also at one point he mentioned Spence took a shot of saying the studio, it would be too bloated, too whatever, it would just be too drawn out or whatever. And Joe made a really good point of being all three of his films are super patient films that like Star Trek can be slow and interesting at the same time. And I thought that was a really good point. So I also went with Joe. Brian, your vote doesn't count. Where would you have gone and why?
Well, I actually agree with Spence. I would much rather see a Drew Goddard Star Trek. I'd be very excited to see a Drew Goddard Star Trek. And I object to Joe's criticism of Into Darkness, which I really enjoy. However, as I said in my opening, this is not who I agree with. It's who debates their points better. And I actually went with Joe as well, because I think he actually won it a large part in his opening statement when he talks about how Jordan Peele kind of gets sci-fi and would be able to use the genre, use the forum to do what Star Trek was originally intended to do, which is make these commentaries on social and racial issues, things like that. So,
all right. So we are all tied up 1-1. Let's get into the next question, which was drafted by Spence in the category of YA. The question is, which character in the Hunger Games series died in the worst way? So Spence, you get to kick this one off. You got 1 minute when you start talking.
I think there are some kinds of pain which are imaginable. There are ways that you hear someone die, it's how does that happen? How does that work? And I think the idea of being torn limb from limb and your body dismembered, every part of you basically being ripped off by raw fingers, seems impossible, and yet somehow people do it. I'm picking President Snow from Mockingjay Part 2. I think that the way that he dies is just something you talk about to sit with and sort of question. How does this happen? How does this work? I don't understand fully how humans can do that. The feralness, the anger, the desire for murder that would drive someone to literally ripping someone off a podium and tearing every part of their body off of their body. That seems physically impossible, yet rage provides it. The hatred that he gave people of the Capitol and people of Pan Am is imaginable. And I think that sort of living in that wonder of how does this happen is much worse than a very definitive, this is what happened, this person died.
Time. Okay. We're going to move over to Joe, who has 1 minute to open his argument when he starts talking.
just taking a look from the outside, I think Hunger Games is a brutal franchise. Kids aged 12 to 18 forced to compete against and kill each other until only one remains. The nature of the games themselves is enough so that any death inside that arena is inherently the worst. But I think Glimmer's death in the first Hunger Games is particularly harrowing. We know that she's a career tribute, someone who has trained her whole life to represent her district. Killing is all she knows. Forced into a pact with people she will eventually have to turn on. And then in these brief moments where she gets peace, where she's sleeping inside the arena, she is woken, and she's woken by being attacked by these genetically engineered wasps that sting her so much and so often that her own body is unrecognizable. Caesar Flickerman describes the effect of Tracker Jack stings as searing pain, powerful hallucinations, followed by eventual death. It's not just the death itself, it's the things that surround it. If you have to look at how Glimmer got here, it's horrible.
All right, Glimmer versus Mr. Snow. 5 minutes when one of you starts talking.
I think the biggest thing against Glimmer's death is at least it was quick. Yes, it was painful. Yes, everything that comes with Dragon Venom is still there. But it took her like a minute to die. Like, it's pretty quick. Snow's death is inconceivable. The amount of blood loss, the amount of organs that need to fail for someone to die of that could take half an hour, an hour. You don't know how long he was suffering through that pain. The pain Glimmer had, yes, was a lot, but it was in such a short amount of time. It was over and done quick. I think a quick death is better than a long and drawn out one.
I think Snow isn't necessarily the worst. I think it's kind of earned. I think you look at Snow throughout the series. You think you've got this cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice 23 children every year to maintain power, finally brought to an end by the very people whose families he was willing to sacrifice. I don't think it's necessarily the worst way. It was a horrible way, but I don't think necessarily for him it's like in the scope of the series, in what the series presents us. I don't think it's the worst way. I think Glimmer, like every other contestant in the games, is a victim. You know, just trying to survive in a world made by Snow and others like him. Snow's death is, it's never really shown. It's mobbed by a crowd. And I think the rest is sort of left up to your imagination a little bit, whereas Glimmer's is fully shown, and it's that horrificness. It's not just what you see on screen. It's when you actually take a step back and look at what the life of Glimmer must have been just by hearing that she's a career, she's trained her whole life to kill, and then you look at what the games are and what they represent. I think that whole thing, the step-by-step approach to get to that death in the first place makes that death the worst.
We're fundamentally coming at this from different directions. I think even in your argument, you're still coming at you still have an incorrect answer. Like, yes, she trained her whole life to fucking die. Like, yeah, your life sucks, but that's not going to change how you die. She's a 1 in 24 chance of winning the games with 3 other people who are the favorite to win. I'm sorry, that's also, I think that misunderstands the argument that you're trying to make. At the end of the day, I think there are other worse ways to die within the overall franchise. And honestly, I think they're all come from my movie. Because I think that Finnick's death, it sucks that he was mauled to death and then blown up. That fucking sucks. And also in terms of like the narrative structure, Finnick had no reason to die. He could have escaped out of there. That's narratively, that's poorly put together. Primrose, she was bombed to make Snow look like a villain. Didn't need that. And then she fucking died for no reason. You're saying I think that if you're talking about, the pain of death, mine is still worse. And you're saying, the tragedy of the character or how it was used in the storytelling, you still picked the worst option. I think there are other characters which benefit your argument more rather than two-pronged attack, which isn't really focusing on one or the other.
But I think you speak against your own argument to that point, because you said, at least it was quick. But these the ones you've just described were even quicker. I think the difference is we don't know what it's like, but it's a little bit more of a told experience what it's like to be just stabbed or electrocuted like some of the people in the games are. But these tracker techniques are specifically described by Caesar about what they are, this searing pain. And you can see by the amount of the swelling and how dismembered, how disfigured her body is at the end of it, how many times she must have been stung. And the thing is, eventual death. That's what Caesar Flickerman said. It's eventual death. It's still searing pain. You see Katniss get stung several times, and she comes out of it okay in the end. But the fact that Glimmer was in this state and it took her to die, it tells you exactly how many times and how often it must have taken her to be stung. Whereas I think, I think you have to look at everything that's presented. I'm not saying her character is, ever shown to be more than just a creature. You only need to scratch at the surface and listen to what's being said in the dialogue, that she is a victim and did not deserve what she got, and that makes it the worst. Snow deserved it, and it kind of softens it a little bit for us as an audience seeing it, but I think it's not the worst. I think you look at Glimmer as a character, if she even shows an ounce of weakness or sympathy in that arena, she dies. Her own clip will turn on her. Everything about that makes it the worst.
I don't think your desire for character empathy really empowers your argument, though. Because at the end of the day, these people died, and my love for these people isn't going to like influence how I feel about them actual dying. The actual pain of death, I think, is like the base of this argument. And then what you're saying is like, oh, we saw her die, we saw Katniss go through smaller effects of this. I think that the pain of the unknown is far worse than the pain of the shown. The fact that we're still able to see the fucking brutal death of Glimmer is fine. We got through it. We saw, oh, this is the worst that can happen. They did not let us see Snow's death because we know how fucked up and terrifying and painful that has to be. And again, I think that you using Glimmer as like, oh, the character feel for it. She still went in. She's still like, oh, I'm so tired to murder these 20 other people. Hopefully one of the 4 of us actually wins this. I think it's unmotivated. I think that using that as the basis of your argument is so wholly distracted from the overall basis of this. I think the Snow's death is awful to sit with. And I don't think using character as the basis is something that really propels your overall final product of what the answer is.
That is an unfair spin. I think it just speaks to part of it. I still, you still hear from Caesar exactly what this person is going through. And like you said, you say Snows is the worst, but I think like with what you're saying, you're putting your own spin on it. Like it's not shown, it's not really described, but he disappears under that mob, but the rest of it isn't really shown. It's not really described, and I think it's your own imagination that sort of does that. With Glimmer, we understand exactly what she went through, and that makes it worse.
Time. All right, Joe, you are going to get to close first. You have 1 minute when you start talking.
I think a worse or more brutal death is not just one that is savage and violent. I think, which both of these are, it's also harsh in its nature. And when you examine these deaths, you have to ask yourself whether Glimmer and Snow deserved to die in the way they did. And Snow put hundreds, if not thousands of families through untold pain every year just to hold on to his own power, finally brought to an end by the very people he deemed dispensable. Yes, it's violent, but it's a culmination of years of evil, unnecessary violence he himself instilled in those people. Glimmer is nothing more than a victim of the situation, a victim of a world where she had no voice, and ultimately a victim of Snow. And what makes it worse is that she was just one of many, and there was nothing more. There was no more thought about it once it was done. That makes it worse is that it's part of this world, and it just happened. Snow's is left more to your imagination, whereas Glimmer's is fully described by Caesar, exactly what Glimmer would have gone through. Whereas you're left to imagine Snow's. That doesn't make it the worst because we don't know exactly what it was, but we know what Glimmer's was.
Okay, we're gonna move over to Spence, who has 1 minute when they start talking.
The reason we're impacted by horror so much is the fear of the unknown. A fear and the lack of knowing is truly what sits with you and terrifies you. And I think that's what Snow's death does. I think that fundamentally not showing it makes it scary, makes it worse because we have no idea how bad this could have been. The exact description by Caesar, by everyone in the game, knowing how Glimmer died, honestly undermines it a little bit. And again, I think your character motivation is taken away from your overall argument. The exact question is, what character died in the worst way? I don't think that overall, she did or did not deserve it is not overall. Even if you're doing that, I think there are better characters that fundamentally attack that better. I think that Finnick and Prim are fully undeserved and unfortunate deaths, which I think are better answers to this question with your prompt in mind. I think that Snow's death is overall still a hard one to with, and we're undermining everything else going on within him. I think that you are underselling overall the pain that can happen with Snow's body, how every single limb, every single piece of flesh and blood and meat and organ has to be removed. That is horrifying. Glimmer died in like a minute. Snow's took a long time. I think time is a big factor here.
Time. All right. We'll bring in the judges.
Can I get the question one more time, Tim, officially?
Yeah, sure. Let me pull that up for you there, Kirk. The official wording of the question was... Why is my thing not loading? Okay, here it is. The official wording of the question was, which character in the Hunger Games series died in the worst way?
All right, thank you.
Shit.
Okay. Brian, you're kicking this one off.
This is actually an easy one for me. I voted for Joe. I think mainly because, as Joe pointed out in his argument, but I was really thinking from the beginning, was that it's who dies in the worst way. We don't know for sure how Snow died, and even Spence kept saying, oh, it's the unknown, and we don't know. We have no idea what happened, and a lot of it's left to your imagination and things like that. And it's, yes, Spence's interpretation of that was vicious and awful, but we don't know that. Whereas with Joe's pick, we know what happened, and so we can at least have something to judge.
Kirk.
Okay, based on the question and my understanding of it, I'm throwing out all the stuff about the characters and who deserve to die how and all that. That's out the window for me. I am going to go with Spence because I agree with Brian in that the unknown thing was a little flimsy, but I don't think Joe laid enough hard to. I think Spence made a lot of assumptions about what happened underneath that mob, and about like organs being pulled out and bleeding to death and all that, and how long it's going to take. And Joe let him have it. Joe didn't fight back. I'd say it's much more likely that he died very quickly under there than it took a long time. But Joe kind of conceded Spence's interpretation. I know he said it's left to the imagination, but I don't think he hit it hard enough. So based on that, and like I said, throwing out all the character motivation stuff, I got to go with Spence.
I also threw out all the character motivation stuff. That stuff didn't really matter to me whatsoever, because I agree with Spence's point of if that was the case, then Prim should have been the answer. When Cody and Kirk and I were talking about this off call, that was one of the first things one of us said. But yeah, I went with Joe, and I do think that I thought that Joe did kind of handle the leaving it up to the imagination thing in the only way he could. I didn't need much more hitting hard from it, because it was a very plain fact of Spence was we don't even see it. We don't even know what happens. And Joe's yeah, yeah. And we know exactly what happened with the tracker jackers. Here's exactly what Caesar said. And that worked for me. I thought that again, if this was an R-rated movie and we had seen what Spence was describing, that's one thing. But when Joe brought up because I was on with Spence, honestly, most of the time when they were talking about all this, ripped limb from limb, because that's how I've always imagined it too. But then when Joe was they don't even tell you exactly what happened, I'm shit, he's right. They don't really. So a lot of the fight was thrown out, like Kirk said, because of that. But at the end of the day, I still went with Joe. I thought that just going between those two, he was able to explain why his death was worse. So Joe wins the point. He's up 2-1. So Spence does need to hit this one in order to.
So none of you feel sorry for Glimmer then? I tried.
No, I don't, honestly.
Oh no, they're all terrible people.
Yeah, I know. I tried a different way.
But we are going to move on to the final question. So Spence needs to hit this one in order to stay in it. This was drafted by Joe. It is in the category of crime. And the question is, which crime film set in Britain has the best performance? So, Joe, you get to kick this one off. You got 1 minute when you start talking.
I think British crime films have always given us interesting characters. I think from those based on real people to those invented by the writer. But I think what makes these characters really stand out is a truly great performance, or in this case, performances, which I think Tom Hardy does in Legend by portraying both Ronnie and Reggie Cray. I think it's not only mesmerizing and memorable, I think it's also something that takes the film to a completely new level. The film Legend itself is a good film, and it really is Tom Hardy that makes it more than that. He is able to create two distinct characters and give two completely different performances. Taking on any lead role can be daunting for an actor, but I think to take on two in the same movie and be remembered for it, doing it successfully, I think it speaks to the level of his performance. I think he's a London boy. The Krays are notorious figures in London. And I think he knows the stories, he knows the legends. And I think it's more than just the performance, it's the pressure. And I think that's what makes it even more of a great performance.
Time. Okay. We're going to move over to Spence, who has 1 minute to open their argument when they start talking.
I think there's something to be said about playing a dynamic character who truly undergoes changes, and it's not, oh, thing has happened, so now it has changed. It's someone who goes from point A to point Z. You could not be more different as a person. And I think overall, that is done best by Malcolm McDowell and Clockwork Orange. I think there is such a hard level of craft you have to overcome as an actor to play something like a true sociopath, a psychopath who has no empathy for humanity and has no concept of what it means to care for someone. And every step of the journey, you truly feel how he changes and who he is overall as a person changing. And I think change is so hard as an actor to truly convey in a single character performance to the end of the film, where it's, has he changed? The question of, oh, you've seen so much, you've seen him change so much. And in the one act of breaking his brain and re-breaking it, is he the same person? And he plays that subtlety so well. Of every point in the journey doesn't amount to this overall final person. And it's not, oh, I don't know, because it's a vague performance. It is exact. It is an exact confusion, which is so compelling and impossible to pull off.
Time. All right. Legend, Clockwork Orange, 5-minute free form, and one of you starts talking.
I think that Hardy gives half of a good performance. I think that, I don't say good, not even great. I think that Reginald is fine. I think that he plays a very safe, very typical mob boss that is like on the left side of Scorsese, not even trying, like a discount Scorsese. Ron is an actively bad performance. I think that he is a broad strokes, no subtlety, very just big, brash, tough psychopath. And I think that is wholly uncompelling and ununique of an overall performance. I think it brings down his other one as well.
I think the thing you have to understand is that the Cray twins are real people. And I think Hardy, coming from a background, very harsh life of crime background that Hardy came from, I think he knows these stories. He knows who these people are. Very notorious in London. I think that's pressure as well. And I think to give that performance, I wouldn't say either of them are bad performances. I would say it's even half a performance. I think it's not just the fact that he's able to show this vulnerability, the confidence of Reginald being top of the crime family, and you've also got Ronnie, who is battling with this battle with his sort of sexuality and his mental health at the same time. I think he conveys that vulnerability really well. I think he shows it when he first meets Frances, Reginald's girlfriend. I think he shows a really sort of sweet side, but also you've got Ronnie and Reggie's fight in the bar, which I think both shows the sort of opposing natures of themselves. I think Malcolm McDowell gives a great performance, but I think the issue with it is it's full of interest, but there's nothing sort of unique about it. And yes, the sort of, you see the sort of the pain of suffering, but when you learn that that's not actually a performance, Malcolm McDowell said himself that a lot of the suffering that Alex DeLarge experiences was real. He felt that suffering for real. That's not a performance. That's just suffering. But I think what Tom Hardy is able to do is to do two contrasting performances, blend them against each other, and make you. And when you're watching the film, you forget that you are watching someone who's not actually acting against anybody, because he's acting against himself. This is more than one take spliced together, and I think each time it's believable that he is there acting against himself.
I don't believe that argument at all. I think that's the thing that Megan Fox deserves an Oscar for being in Transformers, because she's looking at a tennis ball and crying. That is a bad perspective. I don't think that works at all, because every person acting in front of a green screen is therefore the greatest actor of all time. I think that Tom Hardy is just having a character interact with a blank space, and that's not really motivating anything. I think that its dedication to the reality of who the real person is doesn't really motivate a better performance. Movies like Braveheart, Amadeus aren't wholly accurate. They're actually pretty inaccurate. You know what? It's still great. They still find ways to add layers to characters that we didn't know existed, because they didn't. The names are there, and they don't need to be motivated by reality, because the performance there is still amazing. We're talking about overall performance, not even just quality in comparison to real life. In real life, maybe they're like that, but that doesn't mean that they're a better performance. Reginald is fine. The performance is the difference in performance isn't even that large. It is mostly denoted by the script. I think if you remove the script and told Tom Hardy, hey, I need you to say this sentence in both these characters' affectations, whatever, it's not a very big difference. Physically, he plays them the same. There's a vocal difference between Reginald and Ron. It's a small difference. I think overall the performances are too similar to be called great. It is mediocre at best, and overall, I think I don't think that it's driven by anything deeper. I think Malcolm McDowell is working with so much. Yes, he might not be going through real pain, but I still think he's able to convey it. I think the people can just be like, oh, I hurt, and you're like, oh, what is it? McDowell truly shows you an indescribable pain. It's not even just physical; it's emotional. The idea of taking
it's not a performance, it's real. And I think the difference, you say acting against a green screen, anyone can win an Oscar. When people are acting against a green screen, they're coming back as the same character, but where Tom Hardy's doing, he's going from one character and then he's going to do another scene. He's going to do it as a completely different character. I think that transition, that being able to create two different characters, you've got one that sort of has that confidence and cocksureness and struggling with the behavior of his own brother, and then you've got Ronnie, who himself is suffering, but he also has this really unhinged nature, that coming into the pub and demanding a shootout and walking out, storming out and coming straight back in. You can see in his eyes that sort of unhingedness, but then you turn to Reggie and you see that a completely different character under the eyes. It's not just what they're saying or how they're acting. It's the performance behind the eyes of Tom Hardy, I think, is phenomenal, because there are two different sets of eyes for those characters, as weird as that sounds.
But that is so untrue, because Ronnie literally, like in the scene that you're describing, he's just, I want to kill people, and then I want to kill people again. There is no difference. And you described earlier how it's like, I don't know if I'm struggling with my sexuality or not. No, it's not. The second time we see him in a scene, it's like, hey, this is my boyfriend, Taron Egerton, and that's it. He's immediately comfortable. I think that this dynamic range that you speak of is non-existent. It truly does not exist in the overall film. They start and end the film in the exact same place. I think McDowell is someone who was so dynamic, and we were talking about, he's showing real pain. What are you showing you? It's not physical pain. He's showing you emotional. His most beloved thing will rip away from. That is so hard to show. His physical pain is not the thing that's being acted.
Time. Okay. We're going to start with Joe for the closings. Joe, you have 1 minute to close your argument.
In Legend, I think Hardy manages to create two very different characters and plays them in such a way that it all feels natural. We know he isn't talking to himself, but each time Ronnie and Reggie are on screen together, it feels like they really were there together. I think the characters are true to their real-life counterparts, but feel like people rather than impressions. Hardy is able to cope with the pressure of the role and exude the correct amount of confidence and vulnerability throughout. While Alex Delage is a fascinatingly written character, the performance itself is marred by McDowell's own admission that a lot of that really the real harrowing parts, the bit that really go, wow, what a performance, were not performance at all, but they were genuine. He was really suffering. Therefore, the only real performance are the moments of sort of when he has that moment of those moments of gleefulness when he's taking part in the ultra violence. And while they are intriguing, they're not enough to provide a well-rounded enough performance that can be considered the best. There have been plenty of characters that have been shown to show gleefulness in the evilness they are doing. But with Tom Hardy, you get confidence and you get vulnerability. You get two different characters who do show growth, do different change, and it's all in the eyes.
Time. Okay, we're gonna move over to Spence. Or no, we should have gone to.
Yeah, I didn't know if I could say anything.
That's my bad. I'm sorry, Joe. We should have gone to you last, but that's my bad. I fucked that up. But we're gonna have to move on. Sorry, Spence. You are gonna get to close now. 1 minute when you start talking.
I think the difference in performance that you're lauding is one purely motivated by the script. I don't think the acting is actually very different. Physically, they play very the same, but facially, it plays it very the same. The difference is largely a vocal one, which is anyone can do. We all do this. We all do this. It's just we don't do vocal differences. It motivated by the script is not really is not motivating his performance. I think overall, McDowell's actual performance is so singularly him. I think every other performance in that film is good, not great. McDowell shines. McDowell knows exactly what is needed from him. You distract him about physical pain. I think emotional pain is the thing that's conveying that. Even then, that really works. But I think overall, the idea of having to go through everything, this true range of the top to the bottom to the top of just true unhingedness and how we fully understand every moment of that journey is truly incredible. I think Legend overall is from the type that doesn't really have that. It's Reginald who has some struggles, but overall doesn't really change as a person, and Ron never changes. I think that your idea of a dynamic character and it being shown through Tom Hardy is not there. I think Malcolm McDowell is giving one of the greatest performances of all time. It is in his analysis of pain, of trauma, of mental health, and everything works.
Okay. We're going to bring in the judges. All right. So I won't drag it out much. I thought this was really good. Both came at this from different points of view. I did go with Spence. I thought that the argument about it being natural or like real emotions and stuff from Malcolm McDowell, that didn't really work for me. Like if it's on the screen and he was being filmed, it's part of the performance to me. If Mark Hamill, you get a better performance out of Mark Hamill because he's afraid of the Darth Vader costume. You're getting a better performance out of him. Like that happens when you're making movies. I feel like if you're making good movies and you have good performers, that's part of it. So that didn't really work for me. And I thought Spence did a really good job of explaining why Malcolm McDowell's performance is fantastic and why Tom Hardy's doesn't totally work for the huge amount of work that he's given in Legend. So, Brian, where are you going?
I thought they both did an excellent job of supporting their own picks, and I thought they did okay attacking the other person's. However, what tipped for me in favor of Joe was I think that Spence, a lot of his argument kind of contradicted themselves. They started out talking about how one performance of Tom Hardy was good, but the other one was bad, and dragged the other one down. Then later on, it was, oh, they're too similar. There's barely any difference. So I thought it kind of contradicting themselves, and that kind of hurt the attacks.
Okay. And Kirk, are we going to a bonus question or are we done?
This was a tough one. I was really close. I went with Spence because I thought that Spence did I think as far as like selling their own performance, I think they were equal. I think Spence did a little bit better job of picking apart Joe's performance. And I know Joe had the quote from Malcolm McDowell, but out of context, that was hard to interpret. And I think that Spence did enough to negate that. And I think he just sold, and his offense and his offense was equal. His defense was stronger. So their defense was stronger. So I'm going with Spence, and we are going to the bonus round.
All right. So here's how the bonus round is going to work. I have a question for you guys that I've randomized. I'm going to say the question. I'm then going to repeat the question. Once I've said the question twice, you can answer it. Whoever goes first or whoever answers first will be going first. As soon as you have an answer, please say it. You'll have 45 seconds. The second player will then have 45 seconds. Then we'll go back to the first for 30 and then the second for 30. So each will have a 45 and a 30. You can use your time however you'd like. Are there any questions about how this is going to work? All right, so the world of Fanzone that was randomized was the Warzone side of things. And the category that was randomized was comedy. And your question is, which 21st century comedy would be the best to watch on a first date? Again, which 21st century comedy would be the best to watch on a first date?
Mean Girls.
Okay.
Juno.
Okay. Mean Girls versus Juno. I'm going to stay on screen, but I'm going to take the other judges off. Spence, you are going to go first on this. So you have 45 seconds to start whenever you are ready.
I think for a first date, you want to have a pretty safe film that everyone knows, everyone really likes. I think that Mean Girls is a very safe option, which I think works for a lot of people. I don't know a single person who actually dislikes Mean Girls, especially in my age bracket. I think that's a film that I think plays well to all audiences. I think it's a film that people have seen enough that they're like, oh yeah, I enjoy it. I think showing someone a film for the first time, maybe a film like Juno, which I might have missed when 2007 when they came out, or even just now, maybe it's a little bit outdated or past time. I think that showing them a brand new film is not going to play as well, especially because the first date, you want to talk to someone, you want to get to know someone. I think Juno is something that you don't want to talk through. And that if you want to pay attention to it, it's going to detract overall. Honestly, be a bad date. Like if you want a good date, you want someone who you can enjoy spending your time with. And I think Juno isn't going to inform you about the person beyond it. But I also think The Mean Girls is also just an inherently better film. It's funnier, it's better written, and I think the characters are better and more engaging.
Time. Okay, Joe, 45 seconds when you're ready.
I think Juno is a great film for a first date. I think it's exploration of sort of relationships and all that. I think it's a really interesting film to sort of try, but also it's not too heavy. So also it is full of laughs. I think Mean Girls is a good choice, but I also think the issue with it is it's so well saved or so well quotable that you can sort of zone out. I think Juno is an interesting film just because of its perspective and also the fact that it was so sort of well regarded, even in sort of the Oscar consideration. I think it's a really sort of like entertaining film to watch, and I think you get something. I think you get more out of it. I think you get there's more interesting stuff with the characters. I think there's more development around there, and I think you can just sort of gain more from that. And I think for a first date, I think it's a really good idea to sort of see. It sort of allows you to see where you are as a person by how you relate to the characters.
Okay, Spence, 30 seconds.
I think talking about development actually overall detracts from your argument. I think for a first date, you want to be able to talk to someone, you want to get to know someone. I think on a first date, you don't want to just be like zone in, pay attention to a film that I think you're not going to be able to really connect to as a person versus connected to a film. I think connected to a film is not for a first date, probably for like a fourth or fifth date. I think for a first date, you want something like you are safe, you are more familiar with. Like yeah, you go like, oh hey, it's a good time. And I think we're talking about like overall quality. People still love Mean Girls. People still love Juno. I don't think quality is a big comparison. I think Oscars actually take away from overall arguments. It's really not anything. I think Mean Girls is a film that I think plays better to an audience, whereas Juno is more for a singular person. And for a date, you have an audience.
Time. All right, Joe, 30 seconds.
I think Juno as a whole works well. I think it has more to say. It is maybe a little bit more deeper. And seeing how another person reacts to that, I think it's important for a first date because you are getting to know this person. And I think seeing how they react to the certain situations within the movie, such as the way sort of Jason Bateman's character reacts and all that sort of stuff, and how Juno sort of deals with it, and also the development of that relationship, I think it's important to watch that. Whereas I think Mean Girls is more about background film that you can talk and get to know the other person while it's on. I think Juno itself, you can speak and learn a little bit more about who that person is from how they react to certain scenes and certain characters and how they relate to certain characters within that movie.
Yo, blah blah blah. Brian's like ready to go, and I think me and Kirk are like not having a good time. I think I'm gonna label this one Joe Farrelly versus the Roadrunner. I think I might do that. You talk fast, it's okay.
Yeah.
You're not as bad as Koho. Oh, I was ready to go. Now I'm questioning everything.
Yeah.
All right. Kirk, you're starting this one.
Okay. This was tough. At the beginning, again, it was movie the first date, so I was focusing on the date stuff. I was getting more from one person. Spence was coming in really strong on the date stuff. Joe's a little more focused on other things. Joe came in on the date stuff in his closing, which kind of balanced it out. And the question is, what was the best movie to watch? And Joe talked ultimately, and Spence, I know what you're thinking is get you again, but Joe focused on watching the movie, where Spence was like, well, you don't have to pay attention. So I had to, because they both gave me good reasons, really good reasons why it's a good date movie. I went with Joe because Joe told me about actually watching the movie, where Spence had other stuff going on.
Oh man, I didn't even think about it from that time either. Damn it. Yeah, when Joe came in at the end and was basically like, you could see how a date would react to these types of situations on a first day. It was like, shit, Joe, that made me reorganize or have to recontextualize the whole thing. I went with Spence. I thought Spence's overall date stuff hit home a lot more in the sense that watching a fun movie that again, we don't know the other person has seen it, but might know the quotes. It just makes it more for an easier get to know you type of date, but still has good characters and comedy and everything in it for a lighthearted, whereas Juno's maybe just a little too intense. I like Juno better than Mean Girls. I'm going to be honest. I just rewatched Juno and it's great, but this was tough. That was a really good. This has been a really good debate, guys. Good shit. Brian, where are you going?
Like I said before, a lot of this comes down to interpretation of question, and I completely agree because the question was, what movie do you want to watch on a first date? Not what movie do you want to put on in the background and not watch. So into Joe.
Wow. And that means your winner is Joe Farrelly. Wow. All right, Spence, we're going to start with you. Really, really good match.
Damn it.
I know. You played it really, really well. This was, I think, the best of your performances so far. I know you wanted to get to that positive record, but you did really great nonetheless, and this was an outstanding performance and a really, honestly, fantastic match. How are you feeling?
I'm a little upset because like my original pick for Star Trek was Jordan Peele, and I was talked out of it. I think I probably would have won the match then. But no, I think I did really well. I agree with Joe winning on the arguments that he won on. So I think this is just all like fair. I didn't prepare the best. Not really a lot to say. I knew that I could have done better today, but I'm still proud of how I did.
Yeah. No, if this was you at like 50%, then if you put in the work and get to 100, like that's a little scary then, because I thought it was a really, really good performance. So congrats on a good show today, Spence. We'll see you soon as we bring in the winner, Mr. Farrelly. Joe, you're now at 500. You're 2-2. Really impressive match. How are you feeling?
It feels good. Spence constructed some amazing arguments. I think even going into this, I sort of looking at where this match might go. I had a feeling it was going to go down to the bonus. I sort of looked at what I'd prepared, knowing what Spence is good at, and I sort of said that I'd probably get the Star Trek and the YA, and they'd probably get the best picture and the crime performance, because he picked Malcolm McDowell and Clockwork Orange. Is very hard to argue against. So sort of going into that, I was sort of prepared for the bonus. It just happened to be one that worked in my favor. I saw Juno for the first time this year. I thought it was an amazing movie. It's gonna be top 10 first time viewings of the year for sure. Yeah, they constructed their arguments really well and made me work.
Yeah. Joe, like we talked about off screen, but I'm going to share now. You're done for the season, but you're going to be back next year playing in a tournament. The last time you were in a tournament, like we talked about, you came in at the 16 seed and you had to play Kirk at the number 1 seed. But now going into another tournament, a few matches under your belt, how are you feeling?
Feeling good. I know the strength of this division and sort of the players within inside it, and I think it's going to be fun because obviously different strengths coming out at different times. Obviously, the mixture of that with the Fandom and the Warzone, I think is going to be very interesting. Just to see what comes up and who picks what, and if I have time when I'm not studying for trivia to watch the other movies.
Yeah, that's fair. Joe, we will see you next season with another debate match, but great debate tonight. Let's get final thoughts on this one from Kirk.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to see who put the more complete game together, and I think they both did a great job. I think both these players took a step forward in what I saw them do tonight compared to what they've done in the past. And I think this bodes well for both of them, even Spence in a loss. They were both very strong. There was an argument here where I was like, oh yeah, this person definitely won and blew them out of the water. They were all close. They were all well fought. So I'm excited to go in the next season and see what they both do.
And Brian, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, that's just a lot of the same things. I think that some of these were close. I think, like I said, some came down to how you interpret a question. And then the one that I think the deciding one that was the only sweep, and that was Star Trek, which, like I said, I completely agree with Spence's pick, but it's a matter of who debates their argument better.
Yeah. Well, this has been an incredible match. The sun has set literally on my evening here at Fanzone Debate. I'm not sitting in the dark all of a sudden. This was great. Thank you to Brian and thank you to Kirk for judging this one with me, but thank you to Joe and Spence for playing. We'll see you guys real soon with the next match, but until then, have a fantastic evening. Bye-bye.
There we go. Thank you very much. Please come again. We have a lot more groceries.